I did not go back to Blackthorn House because I loved my mother. I went back because she was dead. That sounds cruel. It is cruel. Death strips lies clean. The tender version would be that I returned to settle her affairs, to stand in the place where I was raised, to make peace with old rooms and older wounds. That would be false. I returned because the solicitor called 3 times in one day, because there were papers needing signatures, because unpaid taxes were folding in on the property, because the last person left to handle the house was me. My mother had spent 31 years there after my father vanished. Everyone in Rookfield used the same careful phrase. Vanished. Not left. Not died. Not drowned in drink and debt or ran off with another woman or hanged himself in the barn. Vanished. It gave the village room to keep breathing around the fact that a man had gone into his own cellar one November night and never come back out. When I was 8, I believed the house had eaten him. When I was 17, I decided my mother had killed him. At 36, driving the long narrow road back through the moors under a bruised sky, I had no idea which version frightened me more. Rookfield was exactly where I had abandoned it and exactly as wrong as memory had preserved it. The village crouched in a shallow fold of land where the hills pressed close on every side. Wet stone cottages leaned into each other. Smoke came low from chimneys and flattened under the clouds. The church spire looked less like a place of worship than a black nail hammered into the earth to keep something from rising. Blackthorn House stood apart from the village, a mile beyond the last field wall, hunched at the lip of a small ravine where ash trees bent inward like listeners. It was larger than I remembered and meaner too. The roofline had sagged. Ivy strangled the western face. Most of the windows were blind with dust. One upstairs pane caught the last light and flashed like an eye opening. I sat in my car with the engine idling and watched the house until dusk thickened. No one came out to greet me. No one had come out to greet anyone there for years. The front door resisted the key at first, then yielded all at once with a swollen groan. The smell hit me before the dark did. Damp wood. Dead air. Rot buried beneath lavender polish. My mother had always cleaned obsessively, but there are odors scrubbing cannot kill. Some things sink into a place and make a nest there. I stepped into the hall and shut the door behind me. The silence was not empty. It had weight. It felt arranged. Sheet-covered furniture rose around me like draped bodies in a chapel. The grandfather clock had stopped at 2:17. The umbrella stand still held my father's walking stick. On the small table by the staircase sat a porcelain bowl of keys and coins and hairpins exactly as if my mother had set them down 5 minutes before lying down to rest. There was no sign of the week since her death except the cold. I found the main switches, restored a grudging current to half the lamps, and made myself tour the ground floor before I could lose my nerve. Dining room. Morning room. Study. Kitchen. Scullery. The same wallpaper. The same brass handles polished by hands now ash. The same long corridor to the rear stairs where, when I was a child, I used to sprint without looking left because left was the cellar door. It was still there. Thick oak. Iron latch. Paint blistered by damp. I stood in front of it and listened. Nothing. Ridiculous how disappointed I felt. I slept in the small guest room that night because I could not bear my mother's bedroom and refused my childhood room on principle. I locked the door. I drank 2 fingers of whiskey from a bottle I found in the kitchen cupboard. I told myself I was a grown man in a dead woman's house with central heating and electric light and a phone in my pocket. At some point after midnight, I woke because someone was walking in the corridor. Not pacing. Not wandering. Walking with slow certainty from one end to the other. The boards complained under measured weight. 1. 2. 3. Pause. Turn. 1. 2. 3. I lay rigid under the blanket and watched the strip of darkness beneath the door. The footsteps stopped outside. I had the childish conviction that if I moved, whatever stood there would know I was awake. Then my mother's voice said, soft as prayer, "Daniel, don't open it." My mouth went dry so fast it hurt. I had not heard her voice in weeks. She had died in a hospital 40 miles away with machines breathing where her lungs would not. I had stood beside the bed and watched her jaw go slack and the lines on the monitor collapse into straight light. I knew the exact shape of death. I knew its finality. Still, hearing her voice at the door, I almost believed grief had bent time. "Daniel," she whispered again. "It knows you're here." A long scrape followed, like fingernails drawn lightly down the painted wood. Then the footsteps moved on. I did not sleep again. By morning my rational mind had done what rational minds do. It explained. Old houses make sounds. Pipes knock. Timbers shift. Sleep and memory make ventriloquists of grief. The voice had come from dream residue. The scrape had been a branch against the wall. I repeated these things while boiling water for coffee. I repeated them while making a list of practical tasks. Sort papers. Call estate agent. Photograph valuables. Clear perishables. Check the cellar for damp ingress. The last item wrote itself on the page before I fully realized I had thought it. I looked toward the corridor. The cellar door sat in shadow though the rest of the hall was lit. By noon I had managed everything except going near it. The solicitor, Mr. Vale, arrived at 1 in a raincoat the color of old bone and carried my mother's file in a square leather briefcase. He was a local man, thin and careful, with eyebrows like frost. He spoke in the clipped tone of someone who had spent his life handling deaths without touching grief. He spread papers in the dining room and explained probate, unpaid utility balances, the land survey discrepancy, and the difficulty of selling the house in its present condition. He avoided looking at the walls. Avoided, too, the subject of my mother beyond what law required. When we were done signing, he cleared his throat and said, "There is one thing I ought to mention." I had already learned that in villages, that sentence usually means someone knows more than they plan to admit. What thing? He slid an envelope across the table. No stamp. My name written on it in my mother's sharp hand. She left instructions that this be given to you only if you entered the house again. I stared at the envelope. You could have posted it? She said not to. He stood. She was very specific on that point. I let him reach the door before asking, "Did she ever tell you what happened to my father?" He turned, and for a second something close to pity crossed his face. "No," he said. "But she did ask me, once, whether foundations can remember." Then he was gone. I opened the envelope standing in the hall. Inside was a single page. "Daniel, asterisk if you are reading this, then you came back after all. I had hoped you were stronger than I was asterisk do not go into the cellar after dark if you hear me calling, do not answer if you find the red room open, leave the house at once and go to the church burn the tapes before you listen to them asterisk I am sorry about your father. I was trying to keep it sleeping asterisk whatever it tells you, it lies from hunger mother." No explanation. No signature flourish. No date. I read it 3 times, then laughed aloud in the empty hall because the alternative was to feel my pulse pounding in my throat. Tapes. The study had belonged to my father once. After he disappeared, my mother locked it for years, then converted it into a room for unpaid bills and careful forgetting. I went in now and began opening drawers. The third drawer of the big desk stuck halfway. I forced it and heard wood crack. Inside, beneath old receipts and church donation letters, lay 6 reel-to-reel tapes wrapped in yellowing newspaper and tied with twine. Each had a date written on masking tape. The earliest was from 1987. The latest from 1995, the year my father vanished. Under them lay a key painted red. My laugh did not come this time. There was no tape machine in the study, but there was one in the attic. I remembered because as a child I used to play among the trunks and hated the cloth-covered thing that looked, in low light, like a face with 2 blind eyes. I spent 20 minutes climbing through junk and sheets and mouse droppings until I found it under a blanket and carried it downstairs. I should have burned the tapes. Instead I threaded the earliest one through the machine and pressed play. At first there was only hiss. Then a man coughed. My father's voice said, strained but trying for calm, "Test October 14, 1987. Survey point beneath West Foundation shows subsidence far deeper than plans indicate. Hollow below the old stone. Not natural. Martha says stop digging. She says the house was built over an older site. There are block stairs in the cellar wall behind the coal shelves." He paused. There are sounds from beneath. Knocking in sets of 3. A second voice entered unexpectedly. My mother's. "You should not record it?" Her tone was low, not angry. Frightened. Father gave a short laugh. "If anything happens, there should be a record. Nothing good comes from giving it attention." Another pause. Something faint under the tape hiss. A rhythmic tap. 3 knocks. Wait. 3 knocks. My father again, quieter now. "It did that last night too. Same pattern." The recording ended. I sat very still. Then I put on the next tape. This one had less room around the fear. 20th October, my father said. "We moved the coal shelves. There is indeed a bricked arch. New mortar over old stone. Found iron nails driven into the frame and a bundle of dead blackthorn tied with red thread." His breathing sounded shallow. "Behind the brick there's a passage descending. Stone steps. Air coming up from it is cold enough to fog the lamp." We heard a voice below. Sounded like Martha's mother. My mother said sharply, far from the microphone, "Turn it off. I want the details." "You want proof," she snapped. "You always want proof." Another sound then. Not the 3 knocks. Wetness. A soft dragging, as if something heavy were being pulled across stone at a great distance. My father whispered, "It knows when we're listening." The tape clicked off. The third tape would not play cleanly. The spool jerked. Voices warped. Then a fragment surfaced from static. The monks called it Saint Mercy's mouth. Not a well, not exactly. Buried the bells in the mortar to keep it from learning the house. Then, impossibly, my own child's voice, around 8 years old, saying, "Dad, there's somebody under the floor." The machine screeched. The tape tangled. I ripped the power cord from the wall. My hands had started shaking without permission. Memory is a liar, but certain things return with cruel clarity when given the right key. I remembered waking one winter night to kneeling by the vent in my bedroom floor because I could hear someone whispering below the boards. Not words. Just a wet patient murmur. I remembered telling my father there was somebody under there. I remembered his face tightening in a way I had never seen before. By evening the rain had thickened into a hard silver curtain. The road out would still be drivable, but I had not packed. I had not handled the documents. I told myself I would leave in the morning after one night more. I told myself I would not go into the cellar, not because of ghosts or wells or inherited superstition but because I had heard enough madness for one day. At 7 there was a knock at the front door. 3 knocks. I stood frozen in the hall until it came again. When I opened the door, I found a woman in a dark coat holding an umbrella broken inside out by wind. She was somewhere in her 70s, broad-faced, heavy-eyed, with gray hair pinned back so tightly it seemed to drag at the skin. I recognized her after a moment. Mrs. Wren. She had lived in the cottage nearest ours when I was a boy. She used to give me sugared buns and smack my hand away from her good china. She had also once slapped my mother in the churchyard so hard the sound carried across the graves. No one explained that either. "You shouldn't be here after nightfall," she said by way of greeting. "Nice to see you too." She leaned past me, looking into the house rather than at me. "Is the cellar shut?" I gave a tired, humorless smile. "You tell me." Her gaze snapped to mine. "Don't be stupid, Daniel. That house likes stupid men." The words landed harder because she meant my father. I stepped aside. "Come in or say what you came to say." She entered reluctantly, as if crossing a threshold into a kennel with something loose inside. I took her coat. She refused tea. In the kitchen, beneath the yellow light, she seemed both older and harder than memory had kept her. "My mother told you something," I said. "She told everyone bits. Enough to sound mad. Not enough to save anyone." "From what?" Mrs. Wren took a long breath through her nose. "Before your house was a house, there was a hospice there. Before that, a priory. Small thing. 6 brothers and a chapel. During the fever years they took in the dying because no one else would touch them. Cart after cart came through. The brothers dug deep at the ravine edge where the ground sinks and there's old water under the rock. They lowered bodies till the pit was full. Then more. They prayed over it. Rang bells over it. Built stone atop stone. But people said the pit didn't keep them. I said nothing. She watched the steam rise from the kettle I had forgotten to pour. My grandmother's grandmother told of hearing the dead calling from under the chapel floor. Not moaning. Calling by name. So the priory was abandoned. Years later some landlord built your house on the old foundations because gentlemen never believe peasant stories until the floorboards open under them. And my father. Her mouth thinned. Your father had the arrogance of educated men. He found the sealed passage in the cellar and thought history would reward him for uncovering it. I thought of the tapes. The dates. The eager tone thinning into dread. "What is down there?" She looked toward the corridor. "Hunger," she said. "Old enough to stop being simple." That is not an answer. It is the only true one. She leaned forward. "Listen to me carefully. It does not drag chains. It does not make itself seen because you invite it or because the moon is wrong. It learns. It listens. It finds the voice you'd cross a graveyard to hear and leaves it near your ear. It finds your guilt and makes doors out of it." My skin prickled despite myself. My mother wrote about a red room. Mrs. Wren closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, there was real fear there. Then she failed. Failed at what? At keeping it contained. The kitchen seemed colder. "There is no red room in this house," I said. "There wasn't one in mine either, until my husband heard our son crying behind a wall 3 months after we buried him." Her voice stayed flat, but her hand tightened around the edge of the table. "A room appears where it needs to. Small. Wrong. Red as meat in lantern light. Sometimes it's just a door standing where there was no door before. If you ever see it open, don't look in for long. It likes to be seen." "Why are you here?" "Because your mother rang me Tuesday before she died." She had no breath left, but she said, "If he comes back, make him leave before it remembers him fully." Something knotted in my chest. She could have said that to me herself. Mrs. Wren gave me a look stripped of comfort. Maybe she knew you'd only listen once she was gone. The lights flickered. Both of us turned toward the corridor. From somewhere in the house came a dull knock. 3 knocks. Then, from below us, another answering said. Mrs. Wren stood so suddenly her chair skidded. It has started, she said. Started what? Noticing. She jammed her coat on, shoved past me into the hall, and stopped at the front door. Come to the vicarage. Sleep there. Burn the tapes. Leave by morning. Mrs. Wren. But she was already gone into the rain, umbrella forgotten in the stand. I locked the door and checked every window in the house with a pace just short of panic. I did not leave. Pride, maybe. Stupidity. Maybe I had inherited more from my father than his name. At 10 I took the tapes and the red-painted key into the study and set them on the desk. I stared at them until anger began to replace fear. My mother had spent decades living in this house, guarding some rotten secret, speaking in warnings and half-truths until she died with them between her teeth. My father had vanished into a story no one would state plainly. My whole childhood had been shaped by pauses at doors and nights when she made me sleep with the radio on because, she said, silence carries. No more. I found a heavy torch in the pantry, a box of matches, and the old fireplace poker from the hall stand. I went to the cellar door. The latch was cold enough to sting. When I lifted it, the wood shifted inward by a fraction as if pressure on the other side had eased. The smell that rose was not fresh damp. It was older. Mineral. Mold. Something animal and shut away too long. The stone steps vanished into black. I clicked on the torch. The cellar itself was large and plain at first glance. Shelves. Broken jars. Rusting coal scuttle. Stacks of wood turned soft with mildew. The walls wept moisture. The old shelves along the far side stood half empty. I saw at once where they had once been moved. The rear wall behind them showed a section of mismatched brickwork from floor to shoulder height. Newer than the surrounding stone but old enough now to be furred with white bloom. Iron nails, black with rust, had been driven in a rough crosshatch through the mortar. Several had bent outward as if pushed from behind. There were strips of metal embedded in the bricks. I stepped closer. Not strips. Bells. Tiny bell clappers flattened into the wall under the mortar, mouth sealed forever in stone. I touched one. The metal was freezing. On the floor near the shelves lay fragments of broken brick and an empty square of darkness beyond. A gap. Small, but open. My father had not merely found the passage. He had opened it. I knelt and aimed the torch into the hole. Stone steps descended sharply into a throat of black rock. The light reached maybe 10 feet before being swallowed. Cold breathed up continuously, carrying the smell of water gone stale centuries ago. Something in the dark below clicked softly. Not movement exactly. A fingernail against stone. Then a voice rose, so near and clear I dropped the torch. Danny, my father said from the passage. Help me move this. I stumbled backward, hitting the shelves hard enough to rattle empty bottles. For one insane second relief hit me first. Not fear. Relief. Because the human brain is a traitor when it hears what it most needs. Then I remembered my father had been missing for 21 years. I snatched up the torch and backed away toward the stairs. The beam shook over the wall, the gap, the scattered bricks. Nothing moved. Dad. I said before I could stop myself. Instantly the dark below answered with breath. A delighted intake, wet and patient. Every hair on my body lifted. Then my father's voice again, but wrong now. Too full of echoes. Too many mouths speaking inside one throat. Come lower, it said. I can't lift him alone. Him. I ran. I slammed the cellar door and shoved the bolt home. I jammed a kitchen chair under the handle like a fool in a film. Then I stood in the corridor gasping and listening to my pulse hammer through my ears. Silence. Then, from the other side of the wood, 3 mild knocks. I laughed again, a cracked useless sound. No, I said to the door. Absolutely not. That was when I saw the red light. At first I thought a lamp had somehow been left on upstairs. A low ruddy glow breathed across the landing wall above the staircase, faint but steady, like light through blood. I climbed 2 steps before my body understood what I was seeing. There had never been a door at the top of the stairs. Now there was one. Narrow. Painted a deep, wet red. The brass knob was dark as clotted syrup. Light leaked around all 4 edges. My mother's note flashed in my head. If you find the red room open, leave the house at once and go to the church. The door stood slightly ajar. Every decent instinct told me to turn around, grab my keys, and run for the car. Instead I climbed. I can tell you why, though it doesn't excuse anything. Fear does not always drive people away. Sometimes it narrows the world until only one forbidden thing seems real. All my life had been arranged around half-seen edges. Here at last was an opening. At the top step the air changed. Warmer. Thick. Smelling faintly of iron and old perfume. I pushed the door wider with the poker. The room beyond was small, maybe 8 feet by 10, but the proportions were wrong. The corners seemed both too close and too far. The walls were papered in dark red flock that looked wet under the light. There was no window. At the center stood a chair facing away from me. Someone sat in it. My mother, in the blue cardigan she wore during her last winter. Thin shoulders. Gray hair pinned up. Hands folded in her lap. I could not breathe. Mother. She turned her head just enough to show the line of one cheek. Daniel, she said gently. Close the door. It's cold in the corridor. I knew she was dead. Knew it with the clean absolute certainty of witnessed death. Yet seeing her there, familiar in every detail, I felt the room tilt around me. What is this? My voice sounded tiny. You always needed explanations. She sighed. Your father was the same. Where is he? In the dark where he put himself. Her head turned a little further. I still could not see her full face. You should have left when I warned you. Warned me about what? At first it only hears. Then it imitates. Then, if you answer enough times, it makes a place for you. Her fingers tightened in her lap. It made one for me years ago. I kept the door closed. That was the work. That was all I had to do. A deep sound moved behind the walls. Slow water shifting. You're not my mother, I said. No, she replied at once. But I know what she felt while she died. I took a step back. The figure rose from the chair. Not quickly. Not with a jump or a shriek. Just the normal, hateful movement of a person standing up. Bones unbending. Weight settling onto feet. She turned. Her face was my mother's until the eyes. There were too many tears in them. They brimmed and brimmed but never spilled. The skin around her mouth seemed loose, as if the smile beneath it did not fit. She missed you, it said in her voice. Right at the end. She wanted to call for you when she couldn't breathe. She thought, asterisk he'll come if I sound calm. He hates a scene asterisk. I swung the poker at her face. It struck the chair as the room jolted sideways like a bad reflection disturbed. The figure was gone. The chair crashed into the wall. The red wallpaper shivered. Then every surface in the room began whispering. Not one voice. Many. Layered. My father. My mother. My own childhood self. Mrs. Wren's son though I had never heard him. Strangers. Dozens. The words overlapped into nonsense and then sharpened together into one sentence. Open the floor. The carpet in the center of the room heaved. A square seam split beneath it. I saw black water under the boards. I ran. Down the stairs, through the hall, coat snatched from the peg, keys dropped and fumbled and found, door open, rain in my face. I was halfway to the car when the house behind me spoke in one vast voice made of many. Daniel. I did not look back. The church sat at the village center, its graveyard crowded tight against the road. By the time I reached it the rain had eased to mist, but I was soaked through and shaking hard enough that my teeth clicked. Light burned in the vicarage window. I hammered the bell. A young curate I did not know opened the door in shirt sleeves, startled into stiffness by the sight of me. I need to see the vicar. He led me, with obvious reluctance, into a narrow sitting room where a small coal fire struggled in the grate. The vicar, an older man with a broad red face and the exhausted eyes of parish clergy, listened to my breathless account without interrupting. That, more than anything, unsettled me. A rational man should have stopped me after the first sentence. Should have asked if I'd been drinking or using pills or suffering a grief-induced break. He only listened. When I finished, he rubbed his palms over his knees and said, Your mother came here often. What did she tell you? Enough to ask for prayer. Not enough to help us stop it? Stop what? He glanced at the curate, then sent him from the room. When we were alone, he leaned forward. There are records in the vestry, old parish notes. Not official history. Marginal things. Superstitions churchmen write down so they can pretend later they only did it to refute them. He gave a bleak smile. In 1712, the then vicar oversaw a ceiling right at your property. Several laborers had gone missing during renovation. A red chamber had appeared in the east wing where no chamber existed on the plans. They bricked the lower passage, embedded sanctified bells in the mortar, and forbade the family from sleeping above the original foundation line. I stared at him. You're serious? Entirely. He reached for a decanter, thought better of it, and withdrew his hand. There are limits to what a sensible man can deny after 30 years in one parish. especially when he has heard a dead woman singing from beneath the vestry floor. The fire popped softly. I said, then help me destroy it. His gaze sharpened with something between sadness and irritation. You think no one tried? What happened to my father? The vicar blew out a breath. Your mother told me this much. He opened the block stair. He heard something that sounded like you crying below, though you were asleep upstairs. He went down alone. She followed with a lantern. She said the passage opened into an old stone chamber around a shaft or cistern. Not a well in the common sense. Wider. Lined with niches. There were bells fixed all around the mouth, most broken. Your father was standing at the edge talking to someone in the dark below. Who? She said it was himself. The room seemed to shrink. He turned when she called. His face had changed. She said he looked full of listening. Then something in the shaft lifted his voice and asked her which version of him she wanted saved. I swallowed against acid. She ran. Bricked the stair with help from Mrs. Wren's husband and 2 other men from the village. By dawn, one of those men had cut his own throat. Another walked into the ravine. The third refused ever to speak again. No one moved. The rain ticked faintly at the window. Why didn't she leave the house? I asked. She tried once. The red door appeared in the flat she rented in Leeds. After that she understood the truth. He looked at me steadily. Some things attached to blood and memory, not brick. That ended the last easy hope. What do I do now? The vicar stood and crossed to a cupboard. From it he took a small iron handbell blackened with age and a leather-bound notebook furred at the edges with mold. This bell was found in the old ceiling wall when repairs were done 20 years ago. Your mother insisted I keep it here. He set it in my hands. It was heavier than it looked. Cold as river stone. The notebook is a copy of the old rite, though incomplete. It suggests the thing below can be confined but not killed. Not by men, anyway. Confined how? With bells. Witness. Naming. Refusal. That sounds like church language for hoping very hard. Quite often that's all ritual is, he said dryly. But hope arranged properly can be formidable. I opened the notebook. The script inside was cramped and brown with age. Asterisk, do not answer the familiar voice. Do not look down longer than needed. Let witness name witness. Let the living refuse bargain. Let iron speak over flesh. Seal the threshold before dawn or the chamber learns the house entire star. I looked up. You're coming with me. The vicar hesitated too long. I am not a brave man, he said. Neither am I. He shut his eyes briefly, then nodded once. Very well. We went back near midnight. The vicar came in his old black coat with a satchel of church candles, chalk, and a brass crucifix large enough to serve as a blunt weapon. Mrs. Wren was waiting at the gate of Blackthorn House when we arrived, lantern in hand. She looked unsurprised to see us. I knew you'd come back, she said to me. Men like you always choose the worst version. Glad to see you too. She ignored that and handed me a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Inside was a hammer and a dozen thin iron nails. For the red room, she said. If it opens again. The front door of the house stood ajar. I knew I had locked it. Inside, the hall lamps I had left on were dead. We moved by torchlight and lantern flame. Shadows jumped along the walls. The house felt occupied in a new way, as if our absence had allowed it to rearrange its muscles. At the foot of the stairs the vicar stopped. The red door was still there above us, wider open now. Light pulsed softly from within. Mrs. Wren spat on the floor. Later, she said. Cellar first. The chair I had wedged under the cellar latch lay splintered on the corridor rug. No one mentioned it. We opened the door together. The cold that came up was severe enough to hurt the teeth. The gap in the rear wall was wider now. Bricks lay scattered across the cellar floor. Someone or something had cleared a crouching space through into the passage beyond. Mrs. Wren lifted her lantern. He's done what his father did. Who? I asked, though I knew. Or what wears him? From the passage came a low scraping followed by a sound I will never forget, my own voice, speaking from below in calm conversation with another identical voice. Told you he'd come. Always comes in the end. The vicar whispered a prayer that stumbled halfway through. We crawled through the broken opening one by one, Mrs. Wren first, then me, then the vicar bringing the satchel. The passage beyond was older than the house by centuries. Rough stone sweated under our hands. Steps descended sharply and curved. Bells hung at irregular intervals from rusted brackets overhead, their tongues missing. When the lantern light struck them they gave no sound, but I could feel pressure in my ears, as though they still remembered ringing. The air smelled of wet minerals and a sweet note beneath, rotten and floral at once. At the bottom the passage opened into the chamber. It was round, 20 feet across perhaps, cut partly from earth and partly lined with masonry so old the mortar had gone soft in places. Niches pocked the walls at shoulder height and above. Many held little heaps of black fragments. Bones, I realized after a second. At the center yawned the shaft. It was far wider than a well, maybe 8 feet across, ringed in stone and dropping straight into black water that reflected no light. Around the lip stood iron posts, most bent or broken, each with loops where bells had once been attached. A few still remained. Cracked, green with age, mouths tilted inward. And on the far side of the shaft stood my father. Not as a skeleton. Not as a rotted corpse. As a wet man in work trousers and rolled sleeves, hair dark and thick as it had been the year he vanished. He rested one hand on an iron post and looked at me with my own eyes in his face. Beside him stood another Daniel. My height. My coat. My torch. The beam from my actual hand crossed his chest and did not pass through. He looked entirely solid. The false Daniel smiled first. There you are. The vicar made a strangled sound. My father's double said, I told him not to bring company. I could not move. Mrs. Wren, bless her ruined nerve, stepped forward and raised the lantern. You're not Thomas Hale, she said to the thing wearing my father. And you're not the boy either. The false Daniel's smile widened. No, it said pleasantly. But I hold them better than you held your son. Mrs. Wren flinched as if struck. Then she hurled the lantern. The glass shattered against the stone ring of the shaft. Flame bloomed briefly in spilled oil, throwing the chamber into violent orange. In that light both figures changed. Not completely. Not theatrically. Just enough. Their skin slackened around the mouth and eyes as if a second face beneath were pressing upward. Their limbs looked jointed wrong for an instant, too many hinges. Then the fire guttered and the human shape settled again. Good, said my father's voice from the far side. Anger is cleaner than grief. The water below us moved. Something long turned beneath the surface. The vicar opened the notebook with shaking fingers. We begin now, he said, too loudly. Before it fully. A bell rang. Not from his hand. From above us, somewhere in the house overhead, one clear note. The chamber listened. Every remaining bell around the shaft began trembling on its hooks with a tiny dry chatter. The false Daniel looked upward, delighted. The red room is open, it said. Then the chamber doors of my mind came apart. I heard my mother screaming my name from the passage behind us. Heard the 8-year-old version of myself sobbing in the dark. Heard my father gasping, please, for God's sake, not alone. Heard hospital monitors. Heard my own ex-wife, dead 5 years from a motorway crash, saying exactly the last thing she had said into the phone before the line cut, Dan, I think something's in the road. I staggered. The water in the shaft bulged upward, not splashing but lifting, shaping itself around absence. Faces surfaced in it. Not formed of flesh. Formed of reflection, each one there only while I looked straight at it. My mother. Father. Lucy. My own face older and starved. The vicar shouted from far away, do not answer them. Easy instruction. Impossible task. Lucy looked up from the water and said, terrified, I'm still here. I took one step toward the shaft. Mrs. Wren slammed into me shoulder first hard enough to bruise ribs. Refuse it, she barked in my ear. The false Daniel's expression sharpened from amusement to hunger. The vicar began reading from the notebook in a voice that shook but held. Old phrases. Latin broken by English gloss. Calls to witness, iron, breath. Mrs. Wren snatched the little handbell from my frozen grip and rang it over the shaft. The note it made was wrong for such a small bell. Deep. Harsh. It struck the chamber walls like a hammer blow. All the reflections in the water convulsed. The thing wearing my father recoiled a fraction. For the first time its face lost composure. Enough, it said. The false Daniel blurred and came at us. There is no graceful way to describe what followed. It was not a ghost drifting forward. It was a body moving fast. Faster than human balance should allow, feet skidding and recovering in jerks as if some central instruction had not fully mastered knees. It hit the vicar first, sending the notebook flying. The brass crucifix clanged across the stones. The vicar screamed. I swung the poker. It caught the thing across the side of the head. Bone gave under the blow, but not in the right way. The skull dented and then pushed back outward as if clay were being thumbed into shape from inside. It turned to me with my own ruined smile. Don't make me wear you too, it said. Mrs. Wren rang the bell again directly against its ear. This time the sound burst from it in layers. My voice. My father's. A child's. Something bubbling and deep beneath all language. It staggered backward, feet slipping in the oil by the shaft edge, and for one moment its surface failed entirely. I saw no core, no true face, only mouths opening inside mouths, each one trying a different human shape. Then my father grabbed it. I do not know how else to say that. The thing on the far side of the shaft, the one wearing my father, dropped the pleasant expression and lunged, seizing the other by the shoulder with sudden fury. The two grappled at the edge, forms flickering, faces peeling and reforming in the firelight. And in that chaos I understood something terrible. One of them was less false. Not alive. Not saved. But less false. My father, whatever remained of him, had been down there all those years, not whole enough to escape, not gone enough to stop being used. He shouted at me in a voice that cracked between his own and the creature's, "Seal it, Danny." The water erupted. A black column surged up from the shaft, thick as a tree trunk and glistening with the shapes of faces half risen inside it. It struck my father full in the chest and wrapped him. His body arched backward. For one instant he looked straight at me, and I saw recognition, clean and human, in his eyes. Then he was dragged down. The other thing screamed with him and went over the edge too, fingers tearing at the stone ring. Mrs. Wren lunged for the fallen notebook. "Read." I snatched it up, found no place, found only lines, and started shouting whatever words I could force through my throat. "Let witness name witness. Let the living refuse bargain. Let iron speak over flesh." The vicar, bleeding from the scalp, crawled to the brass crucifix and slammed it against one of the surviving iron posts. Once. Twice. The post rang dully. Mrs. Wren began driving iron nails into the mortar seams around the shaft lip with the hammer, each strike wild and sure. The water rose higher, but not straight. It folded over itself, fighting shape. Voices poured from it now, not chosen ones but many at once. Pleading. Threatening. Begging. Promising. "I can return him. I can return her. I can let you hear the last true word. I can make the room kind." I kept reading. The chamber shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. Above us, through stone and foundations, the bell in the red room rang again and again and again. Then from the passage behind came another sound. Boards splitting. A door opening where no door should be. Red light spilled down the steps. The room had come below. I turned and saw it at the mouth of the passage, the red doorway standing free against the stone, impossible and bright. Inside sat my mother in her chair once more, hands folded. "Daniel," she said softly. "You know your father is gone. Come away from this. Let it have me instead." Mrs. Wren shouted, "Nail it shut." I ran for the oilcloth bundle, snatched the remaining nails, and drove the first into the red door frame at shoulder height. The wood bled dark liquid around the metal. The figure in the chair lifted her face and smiled with too many teeth. The second nail bent. The third went through. The room behind the door deepened impossibly, stretching back into red gloom where more chairs waited in rows. Shapes sat in them. Human outlines. Motionless. I saw one child-sized form lift its head. My skin went numb. I hammered faster. One nail. Then another. The vicar had joined the words now, chanting with me, voice raw. Mrs. Wren rang the handbell over the shaft until blood ran from her wrist where some old scar had reopened. The red door convulsed under the nails. The walls around it pulsed like a throat swallowing. Then the figure in the chair stopped pretending. My mother's face split vertically from hairline to chin, opening not into gore but into depth. Dark water shone inside. A hand reached from that impossible slit and seized my wrist. The grip was ice and iron. In that instant I smelled hospital disinfectant. Heard my mother struggling to breathe. Felt, with sickening intimacy, the exact loneliness of her last hour. The thing showed it to me, not as image but as lived sensation. Her regret. Her anger that I had not come sooner. Her love, yes, but sharpened by disappointment until it cut. It knew I would trade almost anything not to carry that. "Take it," the thing whispered through her torn face. "Take the room. Rest in it. We will speak with her as long as you like." For 1 weak second I nearly said yes. Then I saw Mrs. Wren across the chamber, old and brutal and grieving for a son dead longer than I'd been alive, still choosing refusal. I screamed and brought the hammer down on my own wrist. Bone did not break, but the shock loosened the hand. I tore free, drove the final nail through the crack by the latch, and the red door slammed itself with a sound like a chest cavity closing. Everything stopped. Not quietly. Violently. The red light vanished. The shaft water dropped 3 feet in a single instant. Every bell in the chamber rang once together so hard the air punched from my lungs. Then the silence came back, total and stunned. Mrs. Wren lowered the bell. The vicar sagged to his knees. At the center, the black water settled. We stood there listening for voices. There were none. Dawn found us in the cellar, rebuilding the wall. Not properly. Not like masons. Like frightened animals blocking a burrow with whatever weight they have. We hauled bricks from the fallen breach. Mixed old mortar from bags my father must have stored decades before. Drove more nails where mortar failed. Embedded every surviving bell we could pry loose from the chamber posts. When our hands bled, we kept working. No one spoke of my father. By the time pale morning entered the high cellar windows, the opening was closed again. Ugly, uneven, but shut. The red door was gone from the landing. The upstairs wall showed only old paper stained by damp. I left Blackthorn House that afternoon. I sold it 6 months later to a trust that planned to demolish the structure for safety reasons and leave the ground unbuilt. I did not oppose that. I did not assist either. I signed papers from a flat in Manchester and changed my number and tried, for a while, to become a man with a closed chapter. That is not how these stories end. The demolition crew quit after 2 days. One laborer refused to re-enter because he heard his wife singing from beneath the machinery. Another drove a drill through his own boot to stop, as he later put it, the child under the slab from touching my ankle. The trust fenced the site and declared the ground unstable. It remains so. Mrs. Wren died the next winter. The vicar transferred parishes after suffering what the diocese called exhaustion. In a letter he later sent me, he wrote only this, *, some confinements are local. Some are custodial. Pray that yours is the first kind star. I understood what he meant 3 years later. I had moved twice by then. I kept no antique furniture, no inherited objects, nothing from the house except the solicitor's envelope, which I could never quite burn. I slept with the radio on for a while. Then stopped. Then started again. On a Tuesday in October, I woke at 2:17 in the morning because someone was walking in my corridor. My flat was modern. No loose boards. No settling timbers. Yet I heard clear measured steps outside the bedroom. 1, 2, 3. Pause. Turn. 1, 2, 3. I did not move. The steps stopped at my door. My mother's voice said, very gently, "Daniel, don't open it." I lay there until daylight. There was nothing in the corridor in the morning. That happened twice more over the next year. Always at 2:17. Always the same footsteps. Always my mother warning me not to open. I came to think of it not as haunting exactly but as weather from a place I had once stood. Then, 6 months ago, I found the first red mark. A line of paint the color of fresh meat appeared around the frame of my study door. Thin at first, almost childish. I scrubbed it off. By evening it had returned. The next day the brass knob felt colder than the others. A week later, when I passed it at dusk, I smelled old perfume and iron. I nailed the door shut. Yesterday the nails came loose. This morning I woke to find a reel-to-reel tape on my kitchen table. No stamp on the box. No delivery record in the building lobby. Just my name in my father's handwriting. I have not listened to it yet. I am writing this instead because facts, once arranged, resist madness a little. Because someone may need a clear account. Because if there is still a part of my father somewhere under the old foundation of Blackthorn House, I owe him witness. Because there is a room in this flat now that did not exist on the plans when I signed the lease. It is at the end of the corridor. Painted red. I have wedged a chair under the knob. I have bought every handbell I could find in the city. Their notes are thin things, decorative things, not the iron throat sound from the church, but they are what I have. I have drawn chalk lines on the floor though I do not fully believe in chalk. I have written refuse bargain on every mirror in the flat because fear makes rituals of whatever is near. While I have been writing, the door has not opened. But there have been sounds. Not scratching. Not pounding. Listening sounds. The small movements of something on the other side leaning close enough to hear my pen. A few minutes ago it tried my wife's voice. I say wife because that is the easiest word, though Lucy and I had been divorced 8 months when she died. We had loved each other badly by then, which is to say with history and resentment braided too tight to pull apart. The thing knew exactly what to say. Not help me. Not I'm alive. It used the line that would hurt most because it was ordinary. Dan, she said through the wood, warm and impatient, are you sulking in there? That was us. That was the shape of us at our worst. Not screaming. Not grand tragedy. Petty abrasion. The small knife of domestic intimacy. I sat at the table with both hands flat until the urge to answer passed. Then it laughed in my voice. I think it is stronger than before. Or maybe I am weaker. There are wet footprints in the corridor now. Bare human feet. They stop 2 inches from the threshold of the room where I write. The floorboards beyond them are dry. Something just knocked. 3 knocks. I can smell the old place. Wet stone. Dead bells. Lavender failing to cover rot. If anyone finds this, and if by some stupidity or curiosity you have come into possession of Blackthorn House documents, tapes, bells, or soil from the ravine, burn them. Burn all of it. Do not catalog. Do not preserve. Do not dig. There is nothing noble in understanding every evil thing. If you hear a familiar voice at a closed door, let it speak and fade. If you see a red room open where no room should be, do not go inside no matter who waits there. If you ever stand above black water that reflects faces not present, do not ask questions. It answers. That is how it enters. Not through permission in the childish sense. Through interest. Through the human flaw that believes every mystery improves by being looked at longer. I know now what my mother meant when she wrote that it lies from hunger. Hunger is not simple wanting. Hunger studies. Hunger imitates patience. Hunger can wait 20 years at the bottom of a shaft wearing your father's voice until you become old enough to open the same door he opened. The footsteps are moving again. 1, 2, 3. Pause. Turn. Closer now. Not in the corridor. Inside the walls. There is a small sound under the floorboards by my feet, a faint tapping as if from very far below. 3 knocks. I will not answer. The red door handle has begun to turn. It is turning very slowly, with the courtesy of someone entering a sick room. The bells on the table are vibrating. I have taken up the hammer. If I can pin the frame, perhaps I gain an hour. Perhaps a minute. Perhaps enough for someone to read this and know that the worst things do not always break in. Sometimes they are invited by grief and kept by curiosity and passed like heirlooms from house to blood to room. The latch has clicked. There is light under the door now. Red light. And my mother, on the other side, is telling me in a calm voice I have missed all my life, that she only wants to speak this once, that she has been alone too long, that my father is here, and that if I open the door very gently, I can come home. I am ashamed to say how badly I want to believe her. But I remember the chamber. I remember the water. I remember the thing behind her eyes. So I am writing the last true sentence I may ever manage. Something is coming through the door, and it knows exactly how to sound loved.